What happens when a beloved Southern comedian finally gets pushed too far on live television? The answer became one of the most talked-about moments in late-night history. And it all started so innocently. Before we dive into this wild story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments what you think really happened that night. Because trust me, you're going to want to hear how this unfolds. Leanne Morgan walked onto The Tonight Show, set to thunderous applause. The audience was full of longtime fans, people who'd followed her journey from tiny comedy clubs to sold-out theaters. The energy in the studio was electric. Jimmy Fallon greeted her with his trademark grin, arms open wide as she took her seat. "Leanne Morgan, everybody!" he cheered, clapping along with the crowd. "It's so good to have you here. I've been watching your specials, and I've got to say, you're one of the funniest people working today." Leanne smiled graciously. "Well, thank you, Jimmy. That's awfully sweet. I'm just happy to be here." Jimmy leaned forward. "Your new tour is selling out everywhere. What's it like going from small clubs to these massive theaters?" Leanne laughed. "Oh, it's surreal. I used to do shows for 12 people, and half of them were my cousins. Now I walk out to thousands and think, did y'all mean to buy tickets to my show? Or was this a mistake?" The audience roared with laughter. Jimmy grinned, nodding. "That's amazing. And your comedy, it's so relatable. You talk about marriage, kids, life getting older. Where does all that come from?" "Well," Leanne said, "I've been married over 30 years. I've got 3 kids. And believe me, they give me plenty of material. My husband's the most patient man on earth. He has to be. Living with me." The crowd laughed again. Everything was lighthearted, easy, until Jimmy's tone shifted. "So, Leanne," he began, a different edge creeping into his voice. "Your comedy is very wholesome, very family-friendly. Do you ever feel like you're limiting yourself by staying in that lane? Some of the biggest comedians out there push boundaries, go darker. Do you ever think about doing that?" Leanne's smile faltered for just a moment. "Well, Jimmy, I don't think I'm limiting myself. I'm telling stories that are true to who I am. That's what connects with people." Right, Jimmy said, but he didn't seem satisfied. "But don't you think comedy's about pushing buttons, making people uncomfortable sometimes?" "I think comedy's about making people laugh," Leanne replied, her southern drawl sharpening slightly. "And there are a million ways to do that. I don't need to shock anyone to get a laugh. My life is funny enough as it is." Jimmy leaned back, smiling oddly. "Okay, but be honest. Do you think clean comedy gets the same respect as edgier stuff? I mean, when people talk about the greats, they usually mention the ones who took risks." The audience had grown noticeably quieter. The warmth in the room was gone. Leanne's expression hardened. "Jimmy, I've sold out Radio City Music Hall. I've got Netflix specials watched by millions. I think I'm doing just fine without trying to make people gasp. Respect doesn't come from shock value. It comes from connection." Sure, Jimmy said quickly, raising his hands. "I'm just saying. There's a difference between being funny and being safe, right? Maybe your comedy's a little too safe." The silence that followed was heavy. Leanne stared at him, the humor gone from her face. "Too safe," she repeated slowly. "Jimmy, are you seriously sitting here telling me my comedy's too safe?" "I'm just asking a question," Jimmy said, but his confidence was slipping. Leanne leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. "Let me tell you something about safe. I've worked rooms where nobody wanted to laugh, where people sat there with their arms crossed, just waiting for me to fail. And I won them over. Not by being shocking, but by being real. So don't sit there and tell me I'm playing it safe when you don't know the first thing about what it takes to do what I do." Jimmy shifted in his seat. "Okay, maybe we're getting a little off track here." "No," Leanne cut in firmly. "I think we're right on track. You brought it up, Jimmy. So let's have the conversation." Jimmy laughed awkwardly, trying to steer things back. But the moment had already changed. The audience could feel it. Something raw, real, and completely unscripted had just erupted on The Tonight Show. But the tension was thick enough to slice through the air. The band members exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to play a sting or stay silent. The audience sat frozen, uncertain if this was a bit, or if they were witnessing a genuine meltdown unfolding live on The Tonight Show. "Look, Leanne," Jimmy said, forcing a laugh as he tried to regain control. "I didn't mean to offend you. I'm just saying, in comedy, sometimes you've got to take risks to stay relevant. The landscape's changing. Audiences want different things now." Leanne's eyebrows shot up. "Stay relevant? Jimmy, my last special came out 6 months ago, and it's still in the Netflix top 10. My tour's adding new dates because we keep selling out. What part of that sounds irrelevant to you?" "That's not what I'm saying," Jimmy protested, his smile growing tighter by the second. "I'm talking about artistic growth, evolution. Do you ever challenge yourself to go outside your comfort zone?" "My comfort zone?" Leanne repeated slowly, the edge in her voice making even Jimmy flinch. "You think talking about real life, about being a wife, a mother, and a woman in a world that stops seeing you after 50, is a comfort zone?" "You think that's easy?" Jimmy opened his mouth to respond, but Leanne wasn't finished. "You want to know what's actually safe, Jimmy?" she said, leaning forward. "Safe is sitting behind that desk every night, with a team of writers handing you jokes. Safe is doing the same monologue format that's been done for 60 years. Safe is never having to stand alone on a stage, with nothing but a microphone and your own words, praying people will laugh instead of just stare at you." The audience was dead silent now. A few people in the front row had their hands over their mouths. This wasn't comedy anymore. This was confrontation. Jimmy's face was flushed. "Okay, I think that's a little unfair," he said defensively. "I work very hard on this show." "I'm sure you do," Leanne replied coolly, her voice dripping with restrained sarcasm. "But don't come at me about playing it safe when you've never done what I do. Stand-up comedy isn't safe. It's terrifying. Every single night." "All right," Jimmy said, trying to steer the conversation anywhere else. Let's talk about something else. Your family, maybe. Tell us about your kids." But Leanne wasn't letting him off that easily. "No, Jimmy. You started this conversation." She cut in sharply. "You wanted to talk about whether my comedy's edgy enough, so let's finish it." Jimmy darted a glance toward the producer off stage. Nothing. No cue cards, no rescue. He was on his own. "I just think," he said carefully, "that maybe you're limiting your audience by keeping things so wholesome. Some people might not give your comedy a chance because they think it's all sunshine and rainbows." Leanne gave a short, humorless laugh. "Sunshine and rainbows. Jimmy, have you actually watched any of my specials? Or are you just reading what your staff put in your pre-interview notes?" Jimmy's silence said it all. "That's what I thought," Leanne said, shaking her head. "You know what's really going on here? You don't respect what I do. You think because I don't drop F-bombs every 2 seconds or talk about sex and drugs, that my comedy doesn't count. That it's easy. That it's somehow lesser." "That's not true," Jimmy said quickly, but there was no conviction in his voice. "It is true," Leanne fired back. "And you know what the worst part is? I expected that attitude from some people, but not from you. You built your career on being likable, on being the nice guy, and now here you are, trying to tear me down for doing the same thing that made you famous." Jimmy's jaw tightened. "I'm not trying to tear you down, Leanne. I'm trying to have a conversation." "No, Jimmy," she said, her voice rising just slightly. "You're trying to look edgy by making me look soft. You want to prove to your audience that you can ask tough questions, that you're not just a nice guy interviewer." "But you picked the wrong person for that." The audience was transfixed. A few people had their phones out now, secretly recording despite the show's strict policy. Everyone knew. This was a moment that would go viral before the night was over. "I think we should take a break," Jimmy said weakly. "Oh, now you want to take a break," Leanne shot back. "Now that you've realized you stepped in it? No, Jimmy. You wanted to have this conversation. On your show, in front of your audience. So we're going to finish it right here." Jimmy looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. His voice dropped to a nervous murmur. "Leanne, I apologize if I upset you. That wasn't my intention." Jimmy didn't answer. He couldn't. His silence was its own confession. The air in the studio felt heavy. The kind of silence that television producers dread, but audiences remember forever. Leanne leaned back slightly, her voice calm now, but cutting all the same. "You didn't, did you? Because when men talk about their families or everyday life, it's called relatable. When women do it, it's called safe." The audience broke into another wave of applause, this time louder, more emphatic. Some people even stood. Jimmy's usual grin had completely vanished. He looked like a man realizing, on live television, that he'd just become the story. "I see your point," he said finally, his tone softer, stripped of its performative polish. "You're right. I've never thought about it that way. That's on me." Leanne nodded slowly. "I appreciate you saying that. I really do. But understand, this isn't just about me. This is about every woman who's had to fight twice as hard to be taken half as seriously. Every woman who's been told to smile more, to tone it down, to fit a mold that was never made for her." The audience erupted again. A standing ovation this time. Jimmy sat quietly, letting it happen. There was nothing else he could do. When the applause finally faded, Leanne continued, her tone gentler but still unwavering. "Comedy doesn't have to shock people to matter. It doesn't have to be cruel to be brave. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stand on a stage and tell the truth about your life. And trust that it's enough." Jimmy nodded, his eyes downcast. "You're absolutely right," he said quietly. "I owe you an apology, not just as a host but as a peer. That was disrespectful, and I'm genuinely sorry." Leanne looked at him for a long moment, then offered a small, restrained smile. "Apology accepted," she said simply. "Just think about the questions you ask next time." A nervous laugh rippled through the audience, easing some of the tension. Jimmy managed a faint smile in return. "Fair enough," he said. "I think I've learned my lesson tonight." Leanne leaned forward slightly, her tone softening even more. "Good," she said, "because comedy's big enough for all of us. Clean, edgy, whatever. The point is to make people feel something, and if you can do that without tearing anyone down, that's power." The crowd cheered again, louder than ever. Even the band joined in with a few celebratory chords. Jimmy exhaled, visibly relieved. "Well," he said, trying to regain his footing, "I think we can all agree that was the realest conversation we've had in a long time." Leanne smiled. "Real's what I do, Jimmy." The audience laughed and applauded again, this time warmly. The moment had shifted. What started as confrontation had become catharsis. "Leanne Morgan, everybody," Jimmy said, rising from his chair, his voice tinged with genuine respect now. "Go see her on tour. She's one of the best." The audience roared as Leanne stood, waving graciously. But as she turned to leave the stage, the cameras caught one last shot. Jimmy watching her go, expression thoughtful, humbled. Backstage, producers exhaled audibly, some shaking their heads, others whispering that they'd just witnessed television gold. It would be replayed for days, shared, debated, analyzed. But for those in the studio that night, one thing was unmistakably clear. Leanne Morgan hadn't just defended her comedy. She had redefined what power looked like on live television. "No," Jimmy admitted quietly. "I didn't." "Because they're men," Leanne said simply, her tone even but cutting. And men get the benefit of the doubt. Men get to be authentic, without constantly defending their existence. The audience was silent. No laughter, no murmurs. Just the electric stillness of realization settling over the room. This isn't about humiliating you. Jimmy! Leanne continued, her voice softening, but her resolve unshaken. It's about making you understand. Every woman in this business wakes up knowing she'll have to prove herself twice over, only to get half the credit. We have to smile through it, laugh through it, and act grateful while people question whether we even belong. Jimmy nodded slowly, guilt visible in the way his shoulders slumped. I understand, he said quietly. Or at least, I'm beginning to, and I'm sorry for the way I contributed to that. I appreciate that, Leanne said, but words aren't enough anymore. It's about what you do next, how you treat the next woman who sits here, whether you've actually listened tonight or you're just trying to smooth things over. I hear you, Jimmy replied. I'll do better. Leanne studied him, then looked out toward the audience. For a moment she seemed to weigh her next move. Then she stood, unhooking the mic from her jacket. I believe you, Jimmy, she said softly, but I don't think I can sit here anymore. A wave of gasps rippled through the crowd. Jimmy's eyes widened. Leanne, please, he said, standing too. Don't go. Let's finish this conversation. We did finish it, Leanne replied, removing the mic clip from her collar. I said what needed to be said. You heard me. But I'm not going to sit here and pretend it's all fine now, just because you apologized. That's not how accountability works. Off stage, producers were waving their arms frantically, but the cameras kept rolling. This was live. I respect you, Jimmy said, voice breaking slightly. I really do. Stay. We can talk about your tour, about anything you want. Jimmy, she said, shaking her head. The damage is done. You invited me here for a friendly chat and instead questioned my credibility. You don't get to move past that like it didn't happen. We can fix this, Jimmy insisted. We can have a real conversation now. We just did, Leanne replied. And honestly, I don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to promote my work on a show where the host couldn't be bothered to watch it. The audience was completely still. A few people wiped away tears. I've been in this business a long time, Leanne said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. And I've learned that you have to stand up for yourself. You have to draw lines. And my line is respect. I won't be disrespected, not even on national television, not even if it costs me. Jimmy looked heartbroken. Leanne, I'm begging you, don't leave like this. Why not? She asked, facing him fully. Because it makes you look bad? Because people will talk about it? Because I don't want this to define you, he said weakly. Maybe it should define you, Jimmy, she countered. Maybe people need to see what happens when you disrespect someone, and there are actual consequences. Jimmy opened his mouth to reply, but nothing came out. His silence said everything. Leanne turned toward the audience. Her tone softened. To everyone watching, thank you. I'm sorry this didn't go how any of us expected, but I hope you understand why I can't stay. Applause began, hesitant at first, then thunderous. The audience rose to their feet, clapping and cheering as she stepped away from the chair. Jimmy just stood there, frozen, staring after her. This isn't how I wanted this to go, he said quietly. Then you should have prepared differently, Leanne replied, meeting his eyes one last time. You should have done the work. You should have respected me enough to know what you were talking about. She handed her microphone to a stunned stagehand. The band sat motionless. The cameras stayed on her as she walked off set, head high, shoulders squared, applause echoing behind her. Jimmy was left standing alone at his desk, the light of the studio stage suddenly feeling much too bright. Can I say one more thing? Leanne asked, turning back toward Jimmy. Jimmy's head snapped up. Of course, he said quickly, relief flashing in his eyes, as if hoping she'd changed her mind. Leanne took a breath, then looked directly into the camera. To any young comedian watching this, especially young women, she began, her voice calm but unwavering. Don't ever let anyone make you feel like your voice doesn't matter. Don't let anyone convince you that you have to change who you are to be taken seriously. Stay true to yourself. Tell your stories your way. And if someone disrespects you, you have every right to walk away. The audience burst into applause, this time louder, fuller, almost defiant. People were on their feet, clapping and cheering for her. And Jimmy, Leanne said, turning back to him one last time. I hope you learn from this. I hope the next time you have a female comedian on your show, you treat her the way she deserves to be treated. With respect, with preparation, and with the understanding that her comedy is just as valid as anyone else's. I will, Jimmy said softly, barely audible over the applause. I promise I will. Leanne nodded once firmly. Then she turned and walked off the stage. The audience continued clapping as she disappeared behind the curtain. Jimmy stood there, still staring after her, looking utterly stunned. After a long, awkward silence, he sat back down at his desk. We're going to take a break, he said weakly into the camera. The show cut to commercial, but the damage was done. Within minutes, clips of the interview were everywhere, trending across social media, replayed on news sites, dissected on podcasts. Viewers were taking sides, arguing passionately about who was right and who was wrong. Some defended Jimmy, claiming Leanne had overreacted. Others praised her for her courage, for saying aloud what so many women in entertainment had felt for years. By the next morning, Leanne's name was everywhere. Her tour dates began selling out faster than ever. Her follower count exploded. People who had never even heard of her before were now watching her specials, curious to see what kind of comedian could spark such a moment. And when they watched, they understood. They saw that Leanne wasn't playing it safe at all. She was being bold in a way most people overlooked. She wasn't trying to shock. She was trying to tell the truth. The interview became a turning point, not just for Leanne's career, but for the entire conversation about how women in comedy are treated. Other female comedians began sharing their own stories about the questions they'd been asked, the ways their work was diminished, the quiet dismissals they'd learned to laugh off. Leanne had cracked something open, and through it all, she kept doing what she always did best. She kept telling her stories, she kept making people laugh, and she kept proving, night after night, that you don't have to compromise who you are to make an impact. You just have to be brave enough to walk away when someone tries to make you feel small. So, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. Do you think Leanne was right to walk off? Or should she have stayed and finished the interview? Let us know what you think.